Hello, my name is Roisin and I am reading the Booker Prize shortlist again. I've done this, I think I did this last year and then not the year before, but then I did the 2 years before that. This is my 4th year? This is my 3rd year out of 4 years. Something like that. We have 6 books to read, although I only have 5 in physical copy, the big yellow bee sting, I don't have the physical copy of. And if I'm perfectly honest, I have actually read all of these already. I'm filming this intro actually at the end of this video. This year, the discussion around the Booker Prize longlist has been interesting. I think a lot of people were disappointed in it. We had lots of big hitters releasing books this year: Eleanor Catton, Barbara Kingsolver, Zadie Smith, all eligible, none nommed. And so people were questioning that, and I think people who read the long list were maybe a little more disappointed than me. But spoiler alert, I actually had a decent enough time reading the shortlist this year. I think maybe better than last year. But I'm going to just briefly introduce you to each of the books in the list this year, and then I will take you to Roisin from before I had read any of them. If we're going alphabetically, The Bee Sting by Paul Murray is the first. This is a family saga set in Ireland in the 2010s at some point, I think. We follow all 4 members of this middle-class Irish family as they are on a downturn. There is something going on with the family finances. The father is prepping an apocalypse bunker in the woods. The mother is selling off all her jewels and clothes on eBay. The daughter, who was once a star pupil, is seemingly intent on drinking her future away. And the 12-year-old son is playing military games online and planning to run away. Over the course of the novel, family secrets become unravelled, and we see where those secrets will lead. I believe I've done this alphabet correctly, and don't disabuse me of that notion in the comments if I haven't. Next we have If I Survive You by Jonathan Escoffery, which follows a family of Jamaican immigrants living in Florida in the 80s and 90s. There are 2 sons, mother and father, who left Jamaica due to the political unrest of the late 70s and early 80s, and who lose their house in a hurricane. This story jumps about in perspective and in time over the course of the next few decades in this family's life. Next we have Prophet Song by Paul Lynch, another one set in Ireland, this time in the near future, as something has happened to turn Ireland into a authoritarian state. We follow Eilish and her family as the father, who was a trade unionist, is taken and imprisoned, and the fallout that this descent into fascism has for an everyday family. Next, Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein, which follows a woman who has gone to live in an unnamed northern country with her brother, the country from which her family were forced out in previous generations. But something inexplicable is going on in this small agricultural community, and our main character is the one who feels a sense of hostility growing against her. This Other Eden is set in Apple Island off the coast of the United States, where a very small impoverished community live. People who are a mix of various different people who have fled to this island, various different races and backgrounds, who are being discussed at a eugenics conference and whose future on the island is in danger. And then finally we have Western Line, the story of 3 teenage Gujarati British sisters who have recently lost their mother and whose father has become obsessed with squash and making them play squash. And it is an exploration of grief, belonging and identity and how those relate to the sport. So I will send you back into the past now to see me, who has not yet read these books, and give you some of my first impressions, and then we'll come back here to wrap it up at the end. See you in a bit. Hello, welcome. We are reading the 6 books that have been shortlisted for the Booker Prize for Fiction this year. I know very little about each of these books. I have gone in probably the blindest I have ever gone into one of these shortlists. I don't really know what any of them are about. I have watched Matthew Sharappa's video where he reviews the long list, and I have read some things on Instagram, but my brain is not very functioning, and so I know that Matthew Sharappa had thoughts and I enjoyed the video, but I cannot remember which books correspond with which thoughts. I have no idea which books I'm thinking of liking. I don't think I've read any of the authors before, pretty sure I haven't. I know that 3 of them are called Paul. I've read half of If I Survive You by Jonathan Escoffery, which might be one of the shortest books on this list, and having begun it, I realised that it is the story that has been contentious for making it onto the list at all, because it is, to some people, more a collection of short stories rather than a novel, and so they are interconnected by the fact that they are relating to this one family who are a Jamaican immigrant family living in Florida. A family saga of sorts. Different story, different
sections are told from different perspectives of each of these characters, and also told in different styles. So the first section was from one of the sons, Trelawney, and it was told in the second person. And for the first 3 perspectives, I was like, this definitely seems like a novel to me. We are covering some of the same incidents that happen on their growing up in Florida in the 80s, one of them in his obsession with blackness, because they are a Jamaican immigrant family, but in Jamaica they would be considered like brown rather than black. They have mixed ancestry, and that means a different thing in Jamaica than it does in Florida, and the difference, like the construction of race is a big part of that section. And then we see from the father's perspective, it's more about the immigrant experience, the reasons for leaving Jamaica, the 1970s political situation in Jamaica, and the ways that he interacts with his children, his relationship with his children, his concept of masculinity, his promiscuousness, and his marriage. And so, yeah, it all seemed fairly well connected, I thought, and I really enjoyed the writing. I thought that he is doing a very good job at bringing characters to life. But the 4th section was very tenuously linked. It is a cousin and his relationship with his father and like money and stuff, and it felt odd. It felt like it didn't quite line up. It was very, like, this character had been introduced in an earlier part, but his story hadn't got anything to do with the original story, and also I didn't like it. I thought it was a little easy, I guess, in terms of the plot. I thought that, again, the character work and the dialogue is very, very good, but the actual plot I thought was a bit nonsensical. So I'll read the rest of it. Maybe that will come back in again and we'll find a connection there. But I'm a little wary to see whether this feels more like a short story. And the other one that I'm halfway through is the longest book on the list. It is The Bee Sting, and this one is another family saga. And again, it is told from multiple different perspectives with slightly different styles in terms of each of the perspectives of the mother. It starts with the eldest daughter, and then there is the son, and then the mother. Those are the perspectives that I have read from so far. They're also a very disconnected family who don't really talk to one another, and so each of the perspectives show you a very different time, a very different experience, even though it does cover a lot, again, of the same incidents. And I'm loving this one so far. I'm really enjoying it. Again, the writing style, the voice is so like lively and so realistic. He wrote a teenage girl really well, which I was surprised by. I thought that the perspective of this teenage girl who's like doing her leaving cert and has this kind of strained relationship with her best friend, and also her relationship with like sex and love and obsession with this one female teacher, I thought that was done really well. And then we slide into the 12-year-old boy's perspective. It felt so well differentiated, and I think it's really bringing it to life. But my favourite so far has been the mother, which is written in this kind of stream of consciousness style, which goes back to her childhood and her like really rough childhood, her extreme poverty and abuse, and like a criminal adjacent family. And I thought that hers is just so funny. It's really well written, and I don't, like, oftentimes don't really enjoy humour in books. I don't think it often works very well, but in this one I'm really enjoying it. Really, really funny. Her part, kind of a Derry Girls kind of humour, although perhaps that's a little too like Irish people, so therefore it's the same thing. But it's got that kind of wry, dry, but also absurdist thing that you get in Derry Girls, and I really am enjoying that. I think her perspective is definitely my favourite. I really like her as a character and her just complete exasperation with her children and her husband, and she's like, oh, for fuck's sake, I'm gonna have to do it again, aren't I? And I think it's really, yeah, I'm really enjoying it. Hello, I am now halfway through This Other Eden by Paul Harding. My dad had a friend called Paul Harding. Anyway, I'm halfway through this, and I have to be honest, I have read the first half of this twice now before moving on. First time I listened to the audiobook, and because I hadn't got the physical copy yet from the library, and I felt like it just hadn't gone into my brain, and I hadn't quite processed it properly. So I decided to read it physically, and for me, I think this is a book that needs that. It's not that there was anything wrong with the performances, I couldn't absorb it properly when I was listening to the audiobook. That might also be because I have a cold and like my brain's just not 100% there and I need to take it a bit slower, but either way, I am enjoying reading this. I'll have told you what it's about in the intro, but we are following this community and it does jump about through the different perspectives of the different people. Although it's always in third person, we are viewing the world through the different perspectives. And it is a very sort of slow, very contained novel in this very small place, because on this island there are only 46 people who live there, maybe? Something like that. There aren't many people who live there, and they're all related. And so there is a sort of slowness and a stillness to it, but we can also see a sense of foreboding, because we know that something is coming. There's a lot of repetition of imagery of the flood and the fall, various biblical references throughout, and we know already, because of the setup, because of how it opens, that there are people who are intending to shut down this place, to take people away from where they live. So it is beautifully written, really, really stunningly beautiful writing. Chaplets had wilted since morning and settled limply on the children's glowing white heads. The blossom released their fading scents, as if in harmony with the last light inside the clouds and sky beneath which the island lingered in an even tide of peace, and off drifted the larks, enflowered, ordained to the night. Larks are one of the families, so that's what he's referring to there. So yeah, I'm interested to see in what direction it goes. We know that the destruction of this community is what's going to happen, but I'm interested to see how he gets there, and more interactions with this world, with the outside world, that they are very cut off from. So I am halfway through Prophet Song by Paul Lynch, and I don't, generally speaking, like dystopian fiction. Generally speaking, I find it is very similar. A lot of the time, the points that it is making, the way that it goes about making those points, the stories that it tells, are all very similar. Probably because they often come from like real life examples, and there are only so many examples of how totalitarian states work, and they often like copy one another anyway. So there's not usually that much that's original in them, and that's why I struggle with them. But I am quite enjoying this. I would say not as much as some of the others, but I am liking the writing. We are from the perspective of Ailish, who is the wife of a trade unionist and the mother of 4 children, and the trade union, and it is her husband who is taken away at the beginning of this, because we are in an island that is descending into a totalitarian state. I am listening to the audiobook, and he does pronounce it Eilish, not Ailish. I've only ever heard it pronounced Ailish. He is Irish though, so maybe I'm using the Ulster pronunciation. Regardless, that's not important. So far, yeah, it's a very much focused on the family, and it's not going too in depth into like the big political situation. We're hearing the stories breaking out in the news as they are appearing to Ailish. There's an exploration of like teenage boys and how it affects them, and also the people who get left behind. We're not really very much involved with the state and like what happens to the people who have been caught up in this. We are seeing things from the perspective of someone who is like involved but slightly removed. She's not involved in any of the like protests or anything like that. She's keeping away from that, and she's mostly scared and like wants to keep everyone safe and is trying to keep things together. And as I said, yes, I'm enjoying the writing. It has been a little bit repetitive at times in a way that I'm not sure is working for me. Like I can see that it is sort of the spiral of fear and of feeling like there's an inevitability, but also like it couldn't possibly happen at the same time, that kind of holding that cognitive dissonance. But I'll see where it goes, because so far, yeah, it's pretty, it's good, but it's not particularly interesting, I think, is my experience of it so far. So I am halfway through Western Lane by Chetna Maroo, and I am kind of surprised by this book. I didn't know anything about it going in. It's so quiet and small in compared to the other stories I've been reading. We had like the bombastic thriller with multiple different perspectives and a dystopian future and Jamaican immigration jumping about from multiple different characters' perspectives. But this is a family story, and our main character, the character from whose perspective we see it, is the one who's got like a talent at squash. And so her playing squash and them dealing with their grief, and her father's looking after her as a single dad, and his relationships with other people around them, but from the perspective of a young girl who is, I'm guessing, around 12 or 13, who is, yeah, just dealing with like family relationships, her older sister becoming kind of parentified. And so, yeah, it's a quiet coming of age story with grief and squash as the themes. And I find the writing
quite enjoyable. It's nice. It's a nice book. It's in writing style reminding me of The Discomfort of Evening, but not in content at all. Like, it's completely different. Very much more like warm, like not disturbing at all. None of it's been disturbing so far. So yeah, it's nice. It's a nice story. There's nothing that feels particularly special about it so far. We'll see where it goes, if it changes direction at all, if it becomes very emotional, I don't know. But so far for me, it's fine, it's nice, but it's not particularly special, and I'm curious to know how it ended up in this list. Hello, I am halfway through A Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein, and I'm going to tell you about it. So this book is about a woman who is kind of strange. She has gone to live with her brother, and that he lives in a country from which her ancestors were previously, either through pogrom or Holocaust, it's not really very clearly explained, were forced to leave, but he's moved back to the land of their ancestors, and he's asked her to come and live with her. And she is telling us about living there now that he has gone away. So she was there for a few months and then he went away on business, and she's living in this town by herself. She doesn't speak the language and she feels kind of disconnected from it, but at the same time she's telling us in flashbacks, it's kind of a stream of consciousness, I guess. She's telling us about her childhood, growing up, being the youngest daughter and being expected to kind of look after her family. And that's the kind of obedience. She's always been doing what she was told. And there is references to things like men are to be scholars and women are to work. That makes me think it's kind of like an Orthodox Jewish background that she comes from. Although it's not really made clear. And she's living in this town and she feels like kind of a sense of paranoia that everyone in this town hates her and is out to get her and wishes that she wasn't there. This feeling of foreignness and strangeness. And there's a lot of writing about nature and her going on these long walks and her just being kind of a strange person. Like, she's really disconnected from the world and kind of has a very weird way of thinking. The way that she writes, because it's told from her perspective, is very much this self-abnegation, this self-pity over and over again. It's about like how useless she is and the need to be useful and helpful and help people, and her not disobeying orders and doing exactly as she is told. But there is this feeling of kind of foreboding and kind of something that is going to happen. She's referencing this idea that something is going to happen. So far, I'm not sure how I feel about it. The writing is kind of disjointed in a way that I'm not really like sure I connect with. It feels a little I have to keep rereading sentences because I'm just like not really sure what's going on. She is obviously, as I've said, a strange character, so she's not someone you're going to relate to as such, but I think it could be good. I want to see how this kind of strangeness pans out, because it can be good or it can go in a way that can feel like silly, and the tone of this book is not silly. The tone of this book I'm enjoying. It's kind of cold and weird and uncomfortable, and I kind of wanted to keep that way. So we'll see what happens in terms of plot to see whether I continue to like it or not. And we're back. I'm going to wrap this up in reverse order of how I enjoyed them. And we're starting, as I started reading them actually, with If I Survive You by Jonathan Escoffery. This one has been critiqued for it shouldn't really have been eligible for the prize. A lot of people think it is a collection of interconnected short stories rather than a contained novel, and I can see the arguments on both sides. It does follow one family, it follows ideas of identity and masculinity, what it's like to be Jamaican and American, and how concepts of race are fluid between different countries, and fatherhood and brothers, like familial obligations, duties and responsibilities. I was enjoying it to begin with. It just told each of the stories, each of the chapters, each of the sections, depending on your argument, is told in a different perspective, is told in a different way. We have some told in second person, some that are more rhythmical, some that are more like a straightforward, almost thriller-esque style of writing. But then in the middle, there comes a story that is told from the perspective of one of the cousins of these two boys. He is only tangentially related to the plot, and that one is also the weakest part of the book. It's still a story about fathers and sons, but the plot feels wildly underbaked and just strange. The desires and the reasonings are not fully thought through, the characters have no real personality, and I feel like the rest of the book suffered after that. It just never, whilst there were some interesting like ideas explored, nothing felt fully fleshed out. Everything felt like an idea, the beginning of a book, rather than a completed novel, and particularly not one that should be on a prize shortlist. The writing is interesting, but the characters of the two brothers, their cousin and their father, are all essentially the same, except for like superficial interests. And so the themes of class and identity and belonging, they're just not very explored, and beyond the idea of like, we're Jamaican and race is different in Jamaica and America. I definitely think I would still pick up another book by Jonathan Escoffery, because like I said, I enjoyed the writing and I think he was exploring some interesting ideas. I think the premise of the other book would have to interest me, and maybe like actual short stories is what I would want to read. Next, I would put Prophet Song by Paul Lynch. I don't like dystopia. I don't read dystopia, so I'm definitely not the person for this book. I find that dystopias are usually telling the same story, and this book is just a middle-of-the-road dystopia. Like, it's not doing anything different from other dystopian fiction. Now, I did listen to the audiobook of this, so I didn't get the full experience because this is written in a way like there's no speech marks, there's no even line breaks for dialogue. It's all like one big chunk of text. There you go. And it's not like there are full stops and stuff, but it is pretty run-on sentences, and it is it doesn't give you space or allow you time to breathe, which I guess is in order to build tension, and that was probably a bit lost in the audiobook performance. There was more space and more breathing and more relaxing into it, so I guess I didn't get the full experience, so I can't like fully judge the book. And I did, to a certain extent, enjoy the writing. I thought our main character, Ailish, was a little one note, but pretty well fleshed out. She was definitely like, I am mum, which can be a little eye-rolly, but I think her motives and the way she was expressing herself, it all felt fairly well done, if a little uninteresting. But the main thing that annoyed me about this book was that it lacked any specificity. It was just a very generic descent into fascism. It reminded me a little of Black Butterflies, but that was a true story. That was like based on the true story of the siege of Sarajevo, and it was based on the like person's history. So it feels like that's the kind of descent into fascism we're following. It's not specific to Ireland at all, which I found really frustrating, because I think that Ireland could be a really interesting country in which to do something like this. Like, it's a country that was essentially a theocracy until not long ago, a country like the whole island has a strong history of sectarian violence and relations to that, and so you could see how those things could influence the politics. And when fascism happens, when descents into things happen, they are very specific to the place where they are from. That's what they cloak themselves in. But this was just so vague. It didn't even cover why Ireland had become fascist in the first place. And it felt like it was just treading over old ground. I've been reading this shortlist for a while, and I've noticed that there tends to be one or two quieter books. Last year we had O. William and Small Things Like These, which were both much more subtle and quiet books. And the same is true of Western Lane by Chetna Maroo. This is very subtle, very quiet. It doesn't have huge highs and lows. There are moments of joy and there are moments of real sadness and real tension, but they are very subtle and very modulated through the perspective of the 12-year-old girl that this is written from. It explores ideas of family and belonging and grief, and the ways that grief can turn a family away from one another. Also the things that families will like use to get back to one another, the things they grasp onto. There are also moments of kind of ghostiness in this book, and I love literary ghosts. The moments of where the themes are expressed is so subtle that it feels almost like you could miss it. There is moments of the oldest daughter's parentification, or the father and his difficulties with employment and his grip on reality and his just struggling through being now a single father after he's lost his wife, which are so heartbreaking but so distanced because we are from the perspective of his youngest daughter. I like the way that they are obsessed with these Pakistani squash players and the way that they discuss it. Those are the moments of joy and lightness that there are in here, and there is humour as well. But it is all kind of said with the same tone. Whilst there are shades in the tone, there isn't huge amounts of contrast, which I think for me meant that it was missing something. There could have been just one moment, one part of this that was a little sharper to bring some relief. Both relief as in from the tone, the tone that becomes a little relentless, but grief is relentless, but also relief as in to show a difference, it could be in relief too. But it did have the specificity of identity and the specificity of place that Prophet Song lacked, and it also had the subtlety that If I Survive You lacked. The subtle dealing with some similar ideas of family, although this is about sisters and fathers and daughters, which I think is a slightly less overdone thing than fathers and sons. And it definitely also contained a warmth that both of those books lacked, and that I think was a little missing from a lot of the books on this shortlist. Now this book is the weird woman book on this list, and I think could be the book that is the most like zeitgeisty, the most everywhere in terms of themes and genres and ideas. And yet I'm not seeing this on my Instagram timeline in the way that I'm seeing more mediocre books in this genre, like The Book of Goose or Big Swiss. Those books were everywhere, and I'm not seeing this in the same way. And I think that might be because it is like just literally harder to read, and I don't mean that in a level of intelligence way. I mean the way that it is written is difficult. Our main character is so self-effacing and so disconnected. She feels the need to like caveat and clarify and qualify every single sentence, and so there are just repeated subordinate clause after subordinate clause till we kind of drifted away from where we began, and when the sentence finally concludes, as a reader you've like forgotten where we began with that sentence, like what was going on. Sentences almost need diagramming to understand what's going on. It reminded me kind of if Drive Your Plough Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. It has the same coldness, the same following a main character who has a different way of viewing the world and is very disconnected from the place in which they are, but in a way that makes you like question normality and question what is standard procedure rather than questioning the character. Like you become so twisted into their mind that you are confused. What is actually reasonable? What is actually acceptable? She is quite a self-pitying character, quite a character that does often in books make me want to like shake them a bit. It's kind of the thing that I dislike most in characters, but for some reason her awkwardness and her strangeness made me warm to it more here than I normally do. This is a very off-putting book. I think that is the word that I would use to describe it the most. And if you enjoy books that don't want you to like them, then I think you might enjoy this one. In second place, we have This Other Eden, which is the only book on the shortlist to make me cry, which makes it book number 4 this year, number 3 or 4 this year, that has actually made me well up. Paul Harding is so good at drawing place and characters with just a few words. He conjures this island and its inhabitants so luminously that I really physically felt like I was there. There's a moment with 2 children lying in the grass watching the hay be harvested, and they are drinking lemonade, and it's the first time the boys ever seen ice, and I just felt like I was there getting a sunburn alongside them. The use of the natural world, the look at place and belonging, the way that it tackled this idea of eugenics, it was all done so simply, and that really worked for me. It is constructed interestingly. It's told from multiple different perspectives and it slides through them all so fluidly, and it almost lives at the edge of mysticism. For example, there is a man who goes inside a tree trunk and carves Bible stories on the edge of the tree. There is an element of that idea of the early church and the early church mystics that I thought was really interesting, especially combined with the references to the Gospels, in particular the flood and Noah's Ark. And also the way that same man is in a moment of great trauma when he becomes this elder, and his expression of grief. It gives that sense of the spiritual element of religion, which I actually, as someone who is completely atheist, non-religious, it still worked because I think it worked so well with the tone and the feel of the book. The subject matter is dark and like capital I important, but it didn't feel too didactic or overbearing as books like that sometimes can. But it also didn't feel like it was doing anything particularly original in terms of the subject matter. But overall, I did really enjoy the book and had such a strong emotional reaction to it, which I think is one of the reasons I liked it so much. Also, there is a character in here from Dingle, which is where my granddad was from. So then the book that I want to win the Booker Prize, obviously, is The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. Really enjoyed The Bee Sting. It managed to be creative, literary, original, clever, play with form and with storytelling and with voice, and yet at the same time be incredibly funny, incredibly thrilling, and a page turner. It managed to be a dark, difficult, really serious book and also a really funny, just a pleasure, joy to read book. And the fact that it managed to marry those two things in a Booker Prize book, it's just a Booker Prize shortlisted book, is just so wonderful. It's some of the best storytelling I have read in ages. Again, I listened to the audiobook of this one, and I know that there were some things with form and with the style of writing, the integration of text messages, the shorter chapters that went down to like being single sentences and things, that I lost because I only listened to it. And so whilst that rapidity, the building of tension and the speeding up of the plot, I did get that. I didn't get all of the subtleties and nuances that I would have got reading it on the page, but I still don't have a physical copy of that one from the library, and it's so clear that this is the most popular as well as being the one that I love the most. I think it's just great that I've been getting into chunky books lately, because there is something that chunky books can do with ideas and characters that you just can't get from a short book. They just don't have the space to do it in as much depth without being too obvious. Like the subtlety, because you are spreading it out over time and you're allowing time to do some of the work of building things, I think that you miss that in short books. And this book managed to do what Prophet Song did not. It was a book about dark, difficult subject matter, about family secrets and family decline, about ideas of sexuality and sex, radicalisation online and preppers and doomsday prepping, but it did it so specifically. It was so specific to this family. It was so Irish, so good at grounding this book, at giving it a sense of reality, giving you something to relate to, because I think it's so much easier to relate to specificity than generality, even if that specificity doesn't specifically relate to you. And it's also darkly funny. It's the funniest book on this list. It's one of the funniest books I've read this year. It manages to have light and hope and joy and humanity, even as it's ripping any hope from under your feet. And the way the plot circles, I reread the beginning when I finished it, and I was like, this is so good. This is so good. This is for thriller readers and for literary readers. It is for comic readers, family saga readers. It's for so many people. Honestly, I was reading this as I walked around Florence and my brain was just in suburban Ireland and my heart was in my mouth. Also, a middle-aged man successfully and realistically writing a teenage girl. It can be done. I loved all of these characters, particularly Imelda. I think she may be one of my favourite Irish mammies in fiction. Even when these characters seem determined to break my heart, to like ruin my heart health and their own lives, I still loved them. And as I said, it's just so good to read a book like this on the list. I think so many people could love this, and the fact that it's the one book that I could not get out of my library because it was too heavily reserved, I think it just speaks to that. And clearly that's the one that I want to win. I wouldn't be too upset if it was this other reading, but otherwise I think that's the best one. I think it's definitely the best one. Have you read these books on this shortlist? I think I ranted about that last time for so long. But have you read any of them? What are your thoughts? Which one do you want to win? I think that the announcement is going to be made very shortly, so I'll pin a comment, as always, below this video. And I hope you have enjoyed it. Bit of a slightly different way of doing a vlog for me, so let me know what you thought of the format, if you care at all about the format. And I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and to subscribe, as I ask you every single time. I put out new videos twice a week. I'll see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.